legacy auto. Do you think that some of these companies like Ford, General Motors, even Rivian, not a legacy, but sort of a new emerging EV, are being very overvalued, especially with the legacy auto, given the minuscule amount of EVs they are actually producing and the fact that the capital cost expenditures to begin shifting completely to EVs are not fully being priced into some of these companies?
Right. So you've got Ford, which is really the one I've been looking at. GM is not a player. Ford. So there's a couple things. Ford isn't overvalued because the stock is actually cheap on a PE ratio basis because of their legacy business. If they spun out their EV business, they would go crazy. That stock would go crazy. But they can't because that's the most valuable part of Ford now. So the reason I don't own Ford is because of the Ford dealership model, where the actual business model of Ford is more of a problem than the cars. So the concept of I build cars, I ship them to a dealer, and then the dealer sells them and I get my money. And then the dealer services them and makes all the margin. The dealers kind of have a way better deal than Ford. And I'm not sure the history of how these dealers, but my understanding was that Ford didn't want to probably take the risk of opening up dealerships themselves and spending all the money. So they would partner with these people who would sell the cars for them, essentially. So there's basically a disconnect between the people who sell Ford cars and the people who make Ford cars. And Ford and GM made money on financing the sale of the cars and a small amount of money on the manufacture. But the main issue was financing. That's where they would make a lot of money. Ford Motor Credit, for example. Then the dealers would get the service, and they'd have the lease services and the warranty service business, and then the post lease business. And then they would get commissions for selling the cars. But they somehow retain this sort of power over distribution that nobody else can sell a Ford any other way in this radius from this distributor. And those laws are well entrenched in our society and in our governments. And so Ford has a very big problem if they want to transition to being an EV company, is that people don't want to buy cars from dealers anymore. And so where do the dealers sit here in this future? And I can't find a place because they're so bad at what they do. So I don't see where the dealers sit in the future. So if you're Volvo and you're Polestar, which is a company we're investing in, GGPI, Polestar is using the Volvo dealer and sales model to support their brand, even though it's a separate brand that came out of Volvo. So they get the upside. So Volvo is going to have their own cars and their own EVs, but Polestar is going to get the upside of using the service centers and using the dealers when they need to, but not because they have to. And this is a much better model, and why we invested in Polestar as a standalone company, and the model that Ford really needs to go to. But the problem is Ford is selling their EVs under the Ford brand and not a separate brand. And so the dealers aren't going to go for this because the EVs don't need service. So that's a whole nother problem for Ford, is if you make a car that doesn't need service, the dealers aren't going to be very happy, because we all know what happens to a car in year 3 and 4, right? You got to spend thousands of dollars on stuff, brakes and this and that, So Ford, I think, is properly valued currently. And I'd like their problems to be less than they are, but they're bigger than I think is solvable. So it's not an investment I'm making at the time.